Briarwood Hall, autumn 1817. The great ballroom glowed with the warm light of 100 beeswax candles, their flames casting dancing shadows across walls hung with garlands of late autumn roses and ivy. The clatter of ice in the punch bowls mingled with the music, and the air carried the mingled scents of expensive perfumes, fresh flowers, and the faint smokiness of the massive fireplaces that kept the chill of the October evening at bay. Tonight marked the wedding celebration of William Thornhill to Miss Cecilia Hartley, and the cream of Hertfordshire society had gathered to witness the union of two prominent families. Sophia Harriet Thornhill stood near the tall windows overlooking the terrace, her fingers clutching a glass of champagne she had no intention of drinking. At 24, she had learned to make herself invisible at such gatherings, a skill perfected over 6 seasons of watching younger women secure advantageous matches while she remained overlooked. Her dress, a modest blue silk that had been altered and refreshed 3 times over the years, seemed plain next to the fashionable embellishments that adorned the gowns of the other ladies present. She wore no jewels, the simple blue silk demanding a modesty that felt deliberate. Across the room, her new sister-in-law held court among a cluster of elegantly dressed young women, their laughter carrying a particular quality that made Sophia's spine stiffen with familiar dread. If stories of love found in the most unexpected moments touch your heart, subscribe now and stay with us for this journey. You will not want to miss what happens next. Have you observed her? Lady Victoria Ashton whispered to Cecilia, though her voice carried with intentional cruelty across the polished marble floor. Poor Sophia, still unmarried at 24. One would think after 6 seasons she might accept her fate with some dignity and retire to the country. Indeed, Cecilia replied, her eyes glittering with malicious amusement as she fanned herself languidly. She reminds me of a drab little sparrow always perched at the edges, hoping someone might notice her, though I cannot imagine why anyone would. The women surrounding them tittered behind their fans, and Sophia felt heat flood her cheeks despite her determination to remain unmoved. She had endured such comments before, had learned to let them slide off her composure like rain from oiled silk. But tonight, the words cut deeper. This was her brother's wedding, her own family home, and still she was made to feel like an unwanted interloper. At least she had the consideration not to wear anything that might draw attention, another voice added. Can you imagine if she had attempted to compete with proper ladies? How mortifying that would have been for poor William. Sophia set her glass down on a nearby table with trembling fingers, her vision blurring slightly as tears threatened to betray her carefully maintained composure. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. With as much dignity as she could muster, she turned and walked toward the terrace doors, seeking the relative privacy of the cool night air. The crisp autumn breeze enveloped her heated face like a balm. The terrace stretched before her, illuminated by strategically placed lanterns that cast pools of golden light across the stone balustrade. Beyond lay the darkened gardens, their paths winding into shadow. Sophia moved to the far end of the terrace, away from the windows where silhouettes danced past in rhythm to the orchestra's waltz, and finally surrendered to the tears. She had always known she was not beautiful. Her features were pleasant enough, she supposed, but lacked the delicate perfection that society prized. Her figure offered nothing remarkable, her dowry modest, her accomplishments adequate but not exceptional. For 6 years, she had watched her younger contemporaries secure matches while she remained on the sidelines, growing older and more invisible with each passing season. And now, at her own brother's wedding, she was reminded once again of her failure to fulfill the only purpose society sanctioned for her sex. Forgive me, but I could not help overhearing what was said inside. The deep voice, cultured and unexpectedly gentle, startled Sophia so thoroughly that she gasped and spun around. A man stood several feet away, partially shadowed but clearly having just emerged from the ballroom. As he stepped forward into the lantern light, Sophia's breath caught in her throat for an entirely different reason. Alexander Edward Fairfax, Duke of Roxbury, was widely acknowledged as one of the most powerful men in England. Even Sophia, who paid little attention to society gossip, knew of him. He had been widowed 3 years prior when his young duchess had succumbed to fever, and since that time he had maintained a reputation for cold reserve that bordered on intimidating. He was tall, his broad shoulders filling out his evening coat with an elegance that spoke of expert tailoring and natural athleticism. His hair was dark, touched with silver at the temples, and his eyes, now fixed on her face with unexpected intensity, were a penetrating gray that seemed to see far more than she wished to reveal. "Your Grace," Sophia managed, dropping into a curtsy despite her tear-stained face. "I did not realize anyone else was on the terrace. Please, forgive my intrusion. I shall return inside." "You are Miss Sophia Thornhill, I believe," he said, making no move to step aside. "The bride's sister-in-law." "Yes, Your Grace." She kept her gaze lowered, mortified that he had witnessed her tears. "The words spoken about you were unconscionably cruel," he continued, his voice carrying an edge of something that might have been anger. "I have observed many examples of society's capacity for casual cruelty, but rarely have I heard such vicious commentary directed at someone who has done nothing to deserve it." Sophia looked up at him in surprise. In 3 years of moving through society's outer circles, no one of consequence had ever acknowledged the slights she endured, much less condemned them. "You are kind to say so, Your Grace, but I am quite accustomed to such observations. In my world, such cruelties are often merely inconvenient expressions of fact, after all." "Truth?" His eyes narrowed. "What truth could possibly justify such treatment?" "That I am 24 and unmarried," Sophia said quietly. "That I have failed in the one endeavor society expects of women like me. That I am, as they say, a drab little sparrow who has lingered too long at the edges of gatherings where she does not truly belong." The Duke was silent for a long moment, and Sophia wished desperately that the terrace stones would open and swallow her whole. Why was she speaking so openly to this man? Sophia thought. This stranger embodied everything she could never hope to achieve. He would think her pathetic, or worse, he would pity her. "Miss Thornhill," he said finally, and there was something in his tone that made her look up at him again. "Would you do me the honor of suffering the world to believe, for the remainder of this evening, that you are under my protection?" Sophia stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace." "Pretend you are with me," he repeated, and now his expression held something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "Let them see you return to that ballroom on my arm. Let them see you dance with me, converse with me, receive my attention. I suspect their commentary will change rather dramatically." "But why would you do such a thing?" Sophia whispered, her heart beginning to pound in her chest. "You do not know me. You owe me nothing." Alexander stepped closer, and Sophia caught the subtle scent of sandalwood and something crisp that might have been autumn air. "Perhaps I am weary of watching cruelty go unchallenged," he said quietly. "Perhaps for the first time in 3 years, I have felt something other than numbness, and that feeling is anger on your behalf. Will you accept my offer, Miss Thornhill?" Sophia knew she should refuse. This was madness, a fantasy that would only make her eventual return to invisibility more painful. But something in his gray eyes, some unexpected warmth beneath the famous coldness, made her whisper, "Yes, Your Grace, I accept." He offered his arm, and Sophia placed her hand on his sleeve, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fine wool of his coat. Together they walked back toward the ballroom, and as they reached the doors, Alexander paused. "One more thing," he said softly. "You are not a drab little sparrow, Miss Thornhill. You are a woman who has endured years of unkindness with remarkable grace. That takes a strength most of those people inside could never comprehend." Then he opened the doors and led her back into the ballroom. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Conversation faltered and died as heads turned to observe the Duke of Roxbury, who had not attended a social event in over 2 years, entering with Miss Sophia Thornhill on his arm. Cecilia's face went pale, then red, her mouth opening in shock. Lady Victoria actually dropped her fan, the ivory and silk accessory clattering against the floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Alexander guided Sophia to the center of the room with unhurried confidence, seemingly oblivious to the stares that followed their progress. When they reached a position near the refreshment table, he turned to face her, and Sophia realized with a start that her tears had left tracks on her cheeks. Without hesitation, Alexander reached into his coat and withdrew a handkerchief, the fine linen edged with expertly embroidered initials. With a gentleness that made Sophia's throat tighten, he lifted the cloth to her face and carefully dried her tears, his touch as light as it was deliberate. The gesture was intimate and devastating in its public declaration of regard. "There," he said softly, though his voice carried to the watching crowd. "Much better." "Your Grace, you should not," Sophia whispered, acutely aware of every eye fixed upon them. "Should not what?" he replied, tucking the handkerchief back into his pocket. "Should not offer basic courtesy to a woman who deserves it. Should not challenge the assumption that cruelty is an acceptable form of entertainment." He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping over Cecilia and her circle of friends with cold disdain. "I have always found that those who mock others do so from their own insecurity. It requires no courage to attack someone who cannot fight back, and it displays a poverty of character that no amount of fashionable dress can disguise." The silence that followed his words was absolute. Several of the watching ladies had the grace to look ashamed, while Cecilia's face had gone from red to white, her hands trembling as she gripped her fan. William, Sophia's brother, stood frozen near the windows, his expression caught between shock and something that might have been guilt. "Now then," Alexander said, returning his attention to Sophia with a slight warming of his expression. "I believe the orchestra is beginning a waltz. Would you do me the honor, Miss Thornhill?" Sophia's mind reeled. "Your Grace, I have not received approval from the patronesses of Almack's to waltz," she managed to say. "It would not be proper." "You are at a private wedding celebration, not at Almack's," he replied. "And you are about to waltz with a duke. I suspect that provides all the approval necessary, unless you do not wish to dance?" "I do wish to," Sophia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wish to very much." "Then come." He led her to the center of the floor, and as the other couples hastily made room, Alexander placed his hand at Sophia's waist, the touch feeling less like a convention and more like a promise. His other hand took hers, and when the music began, he guided her into the first steps of the waltz with practiced ease. Sophia had danced many times in her 6 seasons, but never like this. Alexander moved with the confidence of a man who had waltzed in the finest ballrooms of Europe, his lead so clear that she found herself following without conscious thought. They swept across the floor in wide, graceful turns, and gradually the other couples began to join them, though none came close enough to intrude on their space. "You dance beautifully," Alexander said as they completed a turn near the windows. "You are an excellent partner, Your Grace," Sophia replied, and was surprised to hear a note of genuine pleasure in her voice. "I suspect you could make even the most clumsy dancer appear graceful." "I doubt that very much," he said, and there was something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. "But I find there is very little effort required when one's partner moves so naturally to the music. Where did you learn to waltz?" "My mother engaged a dancing master when I was 16, Sophia said. She was quite determined that all of her children would be accomplished in the social graces, though I fear the investment yielded better returns in my siblings than in myself." "I disagree," Alexander said quietly. "I think the investment yielded exactly what it should have, had anyone bothered to truly observe. You carry yourself with grace, Miss Thornhill. You speak thoughtfully. You have endured years of disappointment and unkindness without becoming bitter or cruel yourself. These are accomplishments far more valuable than the ability to paint watercolors or play the pianoforte with technical perfection. Sophia felt tears threaten again, but this time they were not born of hurt. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she whispered. "You do not know me. We have never even been properly introduced." "Perhaps that is precisely why," he replied. "I am not bound by preconceptions or social prejudice. I see only what is before me, a woman who deserves better than she has been given, and who has somehow maintained her essential goodness despite every reason to become hardened." He paused as they swept through another turn. "And if I am honest, Miss Thornhill, I have not felt anything in 3 years except emptiness. Tonight, watching you endure that cruelty, and then witnessing your dignity in the face of it, I felt anger. Then I felt the desire to act. And now, dancing with you, I feel something I cannot quite name. But it is not emptiness." The music ended, and around them the other couples began to applaud politely. Alexander led Sophia to the edge of the dance floor, where a footman immediately appeared with glasses of champagne. He handed one to Sophia, then raised his own slightly. "To your health, Miss Thornhill," he said, "and to the hope that tomorrow you will remember this evening, not for the cruelty you endured, but for the moment you realized your worth is not determined by those who lack the vision to see it." Sophia touched her glass to his, her hand trembling slightly. Around them, she was aware of whispers beginning again, but their tone had changed entirely. No longer mocking, the conversations now carried notes of speculation, curiosity, and in some cases, envy. Cecilia stood with her mother near the refreshment table, her expression one of barely concealed fury mixed with fear. Lady Victoria had disappeared entirely, perhaps unwilling to face the Duke after his public condemnation. "Your Grace," William Thornhill approached cautiously, his expression troubled. "Might I have a word with my sister?" Alexander turned to regard William with cool politeness. "That depends entirely on whether Miss Thornhill wishes to speak with you." William flinched slightly at the implicit rebuke, then looked at Sophia with something that might have been genuine remorse. "Sophia, I must apologize. I did not hear what Cecilia and her friend said until after you had left the room, and by then the damage was done. I should have been more attentive to your comfort. You are my sister, and I failed to protect you from insult in your own home." He confessed he had been utterly absorbed by the pressures of his own wedding and had only caught the tail end of the exchange, a failure of attentiveness he now regretted profoundly. Sophia studied her brother's face, seeing the sincerity there despite her hurt. William had always been kind to her, if somewhat oblivious to the difficulties she faced. His new wife's cruelty was likely a revelation to him. "I accept your apology, William," she said quietly, "though I hope you will consider more carefully the character of those you allow to influence your household in future." "I will," William said firmly. "You have my word." He glanced at the Duke, then back at Sophia. "His Grace has done you great honor tonight, Sophia. I hope you recognize the significance of his attention." "I am not certain I understand it entirely," Sophia admitted, "but I am grateful for his kindness." "As you should be." William hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "The Duke of Roxbury has refused every social invitation since his wife died 3 years ago. The fact that he attended tonight and that he has singled you out for such marked attention will be the talk of society by morning. Your situation has changed rather dramatically, sister." After William departed, Alexander guided Sophia toward the conservatory doors, away from the crowd. The glass-enclosed space was cooler than the ballroom, filled with potted palms and exotic plants that perfumed the air with tropical sweetness. Rain had begun to fall outside, creating a gentle percussion against the glass panels overhead. "Is what my brother said true?" Sophia asked when they were alone among the greenery. "Have you truly avoided society for 3 years?" "Yes," Alexander said simply. "After Isabel died, I found I had no tolerance for the superficiality of social gatherings. Everything seemed hollow, a stage play performed by ghosts. I attended to my duties in Parliament and managed my estates, but avoided anything that required me to counterfeit pleasure. Then why did you come tonight? My own motives remain somewhat indistinct, he admitted, moving to stand near one of the tall windows where rain streaked the glass in silver ribbons. William Thornhill sits on several committees with me. When he extended the invitation personally and mentioned it was a relatively small gathering, I found myself agreeing before I quite realized what I was doing. Perhaps some part of me recognized it was time to rejoin the world, however reluctantly. Sophia joined him at the window, watching the rain transform the gardens into a watery landscape of shadows and reflected light. "I am glad you came," she said softly. "Not only for my own sake, though I am grateful beyond words for what you did, but also because it seems as though you have been punishing yourself with isolation, and no one deserves that, not even for 3 years." He turned to look at her, and in the dim light of the conservatory, his eyes seemed darker, more intense. "You sound as though you speak from experience." "In a way, perhaps I do," Sophia said. "I have spent 6 years at the edges of society, present but not truly seen, participating but not truly engaged. I told myself it was because I did not fit, because I lacked the qualities that would allow me to belong. But perhaps it was also a kind of punishment, a way of accepting what others told me I was worth rather than determining my own value." "And what do you believe you are worth, Miss Thornhill?" The question hung in the air between them, profound in its simplicity. Sophia considered it carefully before answering. "I do not know," she finally said. "But tonight, for the first time in a very long while, I felt as though I might be worth something more than I had believed. You made me feel that, Your Grace. You made me feel visible." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an expression she could not read. Then very slowly, he reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers warm against her skin. "You made me feel alive for the first time in 3 years," he said quietly. "I think that makes us even, Miss Thornhill." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Sophia had never experienced before. The rain continued its gentle percussion overhead, and somewhere in the distance the orchestra began another waltz, but here in the conservatory it felt as though they existed in a space outside of time, outside of all the rules and expectations that had governed their lives until now. "May I call on you tomorrow?" Alexander asked, his voice low. "Properly, with all the conventions observed? I should like to know more about you, Sophia Thornhill. I should like to understand what it is about you that has awakened something I thought permanently dead." "Yes," Sophia whispered, her heart racing. "I should like that very much." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Sophia's breath catch. Then, with exquisite slowness that gave her every opportunity to draw back, Alexander leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, in a kiss so gentle it felt like a question rather than a statement. Sophia had never been kissed before, had never expected to be, and certainly not like this, by a duke in a conservatory, while rain fell outside and her entire world shifted on its axis. When he drew back, his eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her tremble. "I should not have done that," he said, though his hand remained on her cheek. "It was inappropriate and premature, and I apologize if I have offended you." "You have not offended me," Sophia managed to say, her voice shaking slightly. "Though I confess I am somewhat overwhelmed by all of this. This evening began with such pain, and now I find myself standing here with you, feeling things I never thought I would experience." "I know the feeling," Alexander said quietly. "For 3 years I have moved through my days without truly living them. And now, quite suddenly, I find myself wanting to live again, wanting to feel again. And the catalyst for that change is you." He dropped his hand from her face, but took her hand instead, his fingers warm and strong around hers. "This is happening very quickly, and I do not wish to overwhelm you or pressure you in any way. But I need you to understand that what I feel is real, not pity or kindness or some misguided attempt at rescue. You have done something to me tonight, Sophia, and I do not think I shall ever be quite the same because of it." Before Sophia could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn toward the conservatory entrance. William appeared, looking somewhat anxious. "Sophia, I am sorry to interrupt, but Mother is asking for you. She has heard about your dance with His Grace and wishes to speak with you immediately." Sophia felt the magical bubble of the evening begin to deflate. "Of course," she said, turning to Alexander. "Thank you, Your Grace, for a truly unforgettable evening." "The pleasure was entirely mine, Miss Thornhill," he replied formally, though his eyes held warmth. "I shall call on you tomorrow afternoon, if that is acceptable?" "Yes, Your Grace. I shall look forward to it." As Sophia followed William back through the ballroom, now filled with guests who watched her with new speculation in their eyes, she felt as though she was walking in a dream. The evening that had begun with humiliation had transformed into something she could never have imagined, and at the center of it all was Alexander Edward Fairfax, a man who had been as lost as she was and who had somehow found in her a reason to return to life. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in 6 years, Sophia Thornhill found herself hoping for something more than mere survival. She found herself hoping for happiness. The following morning brought chaos to the Thornhill household. Sophia's mother, Lady Margaret Thornhill, had spent the night in a state of high agitation, alternating between excitement over the Duke's attention to her daughter and anxiety about what it all might mean. By the time Sophia came down to breakfast, her mother had already sent 3 different messages to various friends, inquiring about the Duke's situation and expectations. "Sophie, darling, you must tell me everything," Lady Margaret said the moment Sophia entered the morning room. "What did His Grace say to you? What did you speak of in the conservatory? Has he indicated his intentions?" "Mama, please," Sophia said, accepting a cup of tea from the footman. "It was one evening. His Grace was kind to me when others were cruel. I do not think we should read more into it than that." "One evening?" Her mother's voice rose with incredulity. "Sophia, the Duke of Roxbury has not attended a social event in 3 years. He chose to attend your brother's wedding, singled you out for marked attention, danced with you in full view of everyone, and then spent nearly half an hour alone with you in the conservatory. This is not nothing, child. This is extraordinary." William entered the room at that moment, still looking somewhat uncomfortable after the previous evening's events. "Sophie, Mother is right," he said quietly. "His Grace's behavior last night was significant. The man is one of the wealthiest and most powerful peers in England. If he calls on you today, as he indicated he would, you must understand what that means." "What does it mean?" Sophia asked, feeling overwhelmed. "I do not understand any of this. Yesterday I was invisible, and today everyone speaks as though my life has fundamentally changed." "Because it has," Lady Margaret said firmly. "When a duke shows such marked preference for a young lady, society takes note. You are no longer invisible, Sophie. You are now someone who has caught the attention of the most eligible man in England." The sound of carriage wheels on gravel interrupted the conversation, and moments later, a footman appeared to announce that the Dowager Duchess of Roxbury had come to call. Lady Margaret went pale, then flushed with excitement. "The Dowager Duchess? Alexander's aunt? Show her in immediately, Hopkins." The woman who entered the morning room was perhaps 60 years of age, elegantly dressed in deep purple silk that spoke of half-mourning. Her face was handsome rather than beautiful, with keen blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She smiled as she took in the scene before her. "Lady Margaret, Mr. Thornhill, and you must be Miss Sophia Thornhill," she said, her voice cultured and warm. "I am Margaret Fairfax, Dowager Duchess of Roxbury, and I have come at my nephew's request to extend an invitation." "Your Grace, what an honor!" Lady Margaret stammered, dropping into a deep curtsy that Sophia and William immediately copied. "Please, do sit down. May I offer you tea?" "Tea would be lovely, thank you." The Dowager Duchess settled herself on the sofa with practiced grace. "I shall come directly to the point, as I suspect you are all rather bewildered by recent events. My nephew Alexander called on me quite early this morning, which was surprising in itself, as he rarely visits before noon. He informed me of what occurred last night at the wedding celebration, and he has asked me to extend an invitation to Miss Sophia to stay as my guest at my townhouse in Mayfair for the remainder of the season." The silence that followed this announcement was absolute. Sophia felt her heart begin to race, while her mother looked as though she might faint. William recovered first. "Your Grace, that is extraordinarily generous, but I am not certain we understand the nature of this invitation. Is it merely social, or is there a deeper significance?" The Dowager Duchess smiled. "You are direct, Mr. Thornhill. I appreciate that quality. The truth is that my nephew has expressed a desire to know Miss Sophia better, and he wishes to do so under circumstances that protect her reputation absolutely. As my guest, with me serving as chaperone, Miss Sophia will be free to receive Alexander's attentions while remaining beyond any whisper of impropriety. It is, I believe, his way of declaring his intentions while still allowing time for both of them to be certain of their feelings." "His intentions," Lady Margaret whispered, her hand pressed to her heart. "I believe my nephew is seriously considering marriage, Lady Margaret, though he has not yet proposed formally. What I witnessed between them last night, and what Alexander described to me this morning, suggests that something quite remarkable has occurred. However, both parties deserve time to be certain, and I am offering to provide the setting in which that certainty can be achieved or disproven." Sophia found her voice at last. "Your Grace, I am honored beyond measure, but I must ask, does the Duke truly wish this, or are you acting from kindness towards someone your nephew befriended briefly?" The Dowager Duchess turned to regard Sophia with approval in her eyes. "A fair question, my dear, and one that speaks well of your character. I am here because Alexander spent an hour in my drawing room this morning, speaking of you with an animation I have not seen in him since before Isabel died. He told me how he felt when he heard those women mock you, how something awakened in him that he thought permanently lost. He described dancing with you and feeling alive for the first time in 3 years. And he told me about a kiss in a conservatory during a rainstorm that made him believe in the possibility of love again." She leaned forward slightly. "I am here because my nephew is in danger of falling in love with you, Miss Sophia, and I will do whatever I can to help him find his way back to happiness, even if that happiness seems to have appeared quite suddenly and unexpectedly." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. "I do not understand why he chose me," she whispered. "I am nothing special. I am exactly what those women said I was. Plain, unremarkable, easily overlooked." "You are none of those things," the Dowager Duchess said firmly. "You are a woman who has maintained her grace and goodness despite years of unkindness. You are someone who stood on a terrace in tears and then accepted the hand of a grieving duke with courage and dignity. My nephew sees in you something precious, Miss Sophia: authenticity. In a world of artifice and performance, you are real, and that is more valuable than any amount of conventional beauty or accomplishment." She paused. "Now, shall I tell my nephew that you accept my invitation, or shall I return to him with a refusal?" Sophia looked at her mother, who nodded vigorously, then at William, who smiled with something that looked like genuine happiness for her. Then she turned back to the Dowager Duchess and took a deep breath. "I accept, Your Grace," she said quietly, "and I thank you for your extraordinary kindness." "Excellent," the Dowager Duchess said, rising smoothly to her feet. "I shall send my carriage for you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Pack for a month's stay, my dear. I have a feeling we shall need that time at least." She moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. One more thing, Miss Sophia. My nephew Alexander is a good man who has been terribly hurt. If you find that your feelings do not match his, please tell him honestly, rather than allowing things to progress from mere kindness. He has endured enough pain and does not need more inflicted upon him. I understand, Your Grace, Sophia said, and I promise you that I will never willingly cause him harm. What I feel for him may be new and uncertain, but it is honest. After the Dowager Duchess departed, Sophia's mother immediately began planning, listing everything Sophia would need to pack and worrying over whether her daughter's wardrobe was adequate for staying in a duchess's household. But Sophia barely heard any of it. Her mind was still reeling from the rapid transformation of her circumstances, from the reality that the Duke of Roxbury, a man of immense power and wealth, had apparently spent his morning arranging for her comfort and protection. True to his word, Alexander called that afternoon at precisely 3 o'clock. He brought flowers, a stunning arrangement of camellias and roses, and he spent an hour in the Thornhill drawing room, conversing with Sophia while Lady Margaret acted as chaperone. They spoke of books and music, of Alexander's estates and Sophia's childhood at Briarwood Hall, and beneath the surface of polite conversation ran a current of deeper connection that made every exchange feel significant. When he departed, he pressed a folded note into Sophia's hand with a look that made her pulse race. She waited until she was alone in her chamber to read it. "Dearest Sophia," it said in strong, elegant handwriting, "I find myself counting the hours until I may see you again tomorrow at my aunt's house. What has happened between us defies logic and convention, yet I cannot bring myself to question it. You have given me back something I thought lost forever, the desire to live fully, to feel deeply, to hope for a future that holds more than mere duty. Whatever comes of this, please know that I am grateful beyond measure for the gift of your presence in my life. Yours, Alexander." Sophia pressed the note to her chest, her heart full of emotions she could barely name. Tomorrow she would leave for Mayfair and enter a world she had never expected to inhabit. Tomorrow she would begin a courtship with a duke who saw in her something she had never seen in herself. Tomorrow everything would change. She packed her trunk with hands that trembled slightly, choosing her few decent dresses and adding the small personal items that made a temporary residence feel like home. Her mother helped, still alternating between excitement and anxiety, offering advice about conduct in the Duchess's household that Sophia tried to absorb despite her distraction. That night, lying in her childhood bed, for what might be the last time in a while, Sophia stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment of the previous evening. The cruelty of Cecilia and her friends, the devastating kindness of Alexander's intervention, the feeling of dancing in his arms, the kiss in the conservatory that had awakened something she had never known existed. It seemed impossible that such transformation could occur in a single night. Yet here she was, preparing to step into a life she had never imagined possible. She thought of Alexander alone in his grand house, presumably thinking similar thoughts, wondering if what they felt was real or merely the product of heightened emotion and unusual circumstances. She thought of his dead wife, Isabel, whom he had loved enough to mourn for 3 years, and wondered if she could ever fill that space, or if she would always be a pale substitute for a great lost love. But then she remembered his words in the conservatory, his assertion that what he felt was real and not pity or kindness, and she allowed herself to hope. Perhaps this was the beginning of something wonderful. Perhaps after 6 years of invisibility, she had finally been seen by someone whose vision mattered. Perhaps the drab little sparrow was about to discover she had wings after all. The Dowager Duchess's townhouse in Mayfair was everything Sophia had imagined, and more. The elegant Georgian building rose 4 stories, its cream-colored facade ornamented with wrought-iron balconies and tall windows that gleamed in the morning sunlight. Inside, the rooms were decorated with exquisite taste, a perfect balance of luxury and comfort that spoke of both wealth and genuine refinement. "Welcome, my dear," the Dowager Duchess said, as she led Sophia up the sweeping staircase to the guest chambers on the 2nd floor. I hope you will be comfortable here. Your room overlooks the garden, which I think you will enjoy. It is a peaceful spot for morning reflection." The chamber was indeed lovely, with walls covered in pale blue silk, an elegant four-poster bed dressed in white linens, and a writing desk positioned near the windows where morning light would be perfect for correspondence. Sophia felt tears threaten at the overwhelming generosity. "Your Grace, I do not know how to thank you," she said quietly. "This is all so far beyond what I ever expected or deserve." "Nonsense," the older woman said firmly. "You deserve every bit of this and more, Miss Sophia. Now, I shall let you rest and refresh yourself after the journey. Alexander will be calling at 4 o'clock for tea, and I suspect you will want time to prepare yourself emotionally as well as physically for that meeting." When Alexander arrived that afternoon, Sophia was waiting in the drawing room with the Dowager Duchess, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. He entered with his characteristic controlled grace, but when his eyes found Sophia, something in his expression softened visibly. "Miss Sophia," he said, crossing to take her hand and press a kiss to her gloved fingers. "I am delighted to see you settled comfortably in my aunt's care." "Your Grace," Sophia replied, curtsying. "Thank you for arranging such wonderful hospitality." They sat for tea, the Dowager Duchess serving as an attentive but unobtrusive presence, allowing them to converse while maintaining the proper conventions. Alexander spoke of his morning ride in Hyde Park, and Sophia described her journey from Briarwood Hall, and gradually the initial awkwardness gave way to the same easy connection they had discovered at the wedding. "I wonder, Aunt Margaret," Alexander said after they had been conversing for half an hour, "might I invite Miss Sophia to walk with me in the garden? With your accompaniment, of course, to observe the proprieties?" "Certainly, my dear boy," the Dowager Duchess replied. "The garden is particularly lovely this time of year. I shall bring my embroidery and sit on the bench near the fountain while you and Miss Sophia walk the paths." The garden was indeed beautiful. A carefully designed space of gravel walks, flowering shrubs, and late-blooming roses that filled the air with subtle perfume. The Dowager Duchess settled herself on a stone bench with her embroidery, positioned where she could observe them but not overhear their conversation. "I have thought of little else but you since the wedding," Alexander said quietly as they walked slowly along the main path. "I find myself quite bewildered by the intensity of what I feel. 3 years of numbness, and then suddenly, quite suddenly, you appeared and everything changed." "I feel the same bewilderment," Sophia admitted. "Part of me wonders if we are both simply caught up in the drama of the moment, if what we feel is real or merely a reaction to extraordinary circumstances." "I have considered that possibility," Alexander said. "I have spent hours examining my feelings, trying to determine if this is genuine or merely the product of grief finally releasing its hold on me and you happening to be present when that occurred. But each time I think of you, each time I remember dancing with you or kissing you in that conservatory, I know with certainty that this is not coincidence or transference. This is real, Sophia. What I feel for you is real." They walked in silence for a moment, and Sophia felt the weight of his words settling over her like a cloak. "Your wife," she said carefully. "Isabel. Do you still love her?" Alexander stopped walking and turned to face her. "I will always love Isabel," he said honestly. "She was my first love, my companion for 5 years, and her death devastated me. But what I feel for you is not a betrayal of that love, nor is it a pale imitation of it. You are not a replacement for her, Sophia. You are entirely yourself, and what I feel for you is unique and specific to who you are. Does that make sense?" "Yes," Sophia whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "It makes perfect sense, and it is the answer I needed to hear. I could never compete with a ghost, Your Grace. I could never be good enough if you were constantly measuring me against a lost ideal." "You do not need to compete," he said gently. "You need only be yourself, Sophia. That is more than enough." Over the following weeks, a pattern established itself. Alexander called every afternoon, and they would walk in the garden or sit in the drawing room conversing while the Dowager Duchess provided chaperone services with benevolent discretion. Sometimes they went for drives in Hyde Park during the promenade hour, where all of society could observe them together. Other times they attended theater performances or musical evenings, always properly accompanied, always observing every convention of courtship. And through it all, Sophia felt herself falling deeper under Alexander's spell. She learned about his estates, his work in Parliament, his passionate interest in agricultural reform that surprised her with its genuine concern for tenant welfare. He learned about her childhood, her love of reading, her skill at watercolors that she dismissed as modest, but which he insisted on seeing when he discovered paint supplies in her room. "These are extraordinary," he said one afternoon, studying the small landscape paintings she had done of Briarwood Hall's gardens. "Why did you tell me you had no particular talents?" "Because they are merely adequate," Sophia replied. "Nothing compared to the accomplished young ladies who exhibit at Somerset House." "Sophia," he said, turning to face her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "When will you stop measuring yourself by what others can do and start valuing what you yourself accomplish? These paintings show genuine talent, and more importantly, they show how you see the world. That is precious." It was moments like these, when he challenged her to see herself differently, that Sophia felt the full force of what was happening between them. He was not merely courting her. He was teaching her to believe in her own worth, to recognize that her value did not depend on being the most beautiful or accomplished or sought-after woman in society. He saw her truly, and in doing so, he was helping her see herself. But not everyone was pleased by the developing relationship. Cecilia had sent several letters to Sophia, each more desperate than the last, attempting to repair the damage done at the wedding. She claimed she had been influenced by her friends, that she had not meant the cruel words, that she hoped Sophia would forgive her and help smooth relations between them and the Duke. Sophia did not reply to any of them. More troubling were the whispers that began circulating through society. Some questioned whether Sophia had trapped the Duke somehow, whether a plain girl from an unremarkable family could possibly be worthy of such an elevated match. Others suggested the Duke was merely being kind to a pathetic wallflower and would eventually tire of the novelty. Lady Victoria Ashton, Cecilia's friend who had been present during the initial cruelty, began spreading rumors that Sophia had deliberately engineered the entire situation, that she had manipulated events to gain the Duke's sympathy. Alexander heard these rumors and grew coldly furious. "I shall not tolerate such slander," he told Sophia one afternoon, when she had reluctantly mentioned the gossip. "Would you object if I addressed this directly?" "I do not wish to cause more scandal," Sophia said quietly. "Perhaps it is better to simply ignore such talk. It will fade eventually." "It will not fade," Alexander said firmly. "Not unless we address it head-on. These people need to understand that my regard for you is genuine and based on your merit, not on pity or manipulation. And they need to understand that anyone who insults you insults me." The opportunity to make such a statement came 3 days later at a ball hosted by Lady Martindale, one of society's most influential hostesses. Alexander and Sophia attended together, the Dowager Duchess accompanying them as chaperone, and their entrance caused the usual ripple of interest and speculation. Alexander led Sophia directly to the center of the ballroom, where they were immediately surrounded by curious well-wishers and thinly disguised gossips. Lady Victoria was there, her expression a mixture of false sweetness and barely concealed malice. "Your Grace," she simpered, approaching with exaggerated delight. "How wonderful to see you! And Miss Thornhill, how you have risen in the world! Who would have imagined when we saw you at your brother's wedding that you would so quickly secure the Duke's attention? One might almost call it miraculous." The implication was clear, that Sophia had somehow engineered or manipulated the situation. Around them, conversation died as people strained to hear Alexander's response. "Indeed, Lady Victoria, Alexander said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent space. It was miraculous, though not in the way you suggest. The miracle was that after 3 years of seeing nothing in society worth my attention, I happened to witness genuine grace and goodness in circumstances designed to humiliate. Miss Sophia bore your cruelty and that of others with remarkable dignity, and in doing so, she revealed a strength of character that I find infinitely more valuable than conventional beauty or accomplishment. He paused, letting his words sink in. I also find it miraculous that I was present to witness it, as I might easily have declined the invitation to attend. But Providence arranged for me to be exactly where I needed to be, when I needed to be there, to meet the woman I believe I was meant to find. Lady Victoria's face had gone pale. Your Grace, I meant no offense. Did you not? Alexander's tone was glacial. Because it seems to me that your words were carefully chosen to cast doubt on Miss Sophia's character and motivations. Let me be absolutely clear, Lady Victoria, and let all of society hear this. Miss Sophia Thornhill did not seek my attention. She did not manipulate or scheme or play any of the games that you and others seem to assume are universal female behavior. She simply existed as herself, with honesty and grace, and I found in her something I had not known I was searching for. Anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me personally. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, applause began from a corner of the room where the Dowager Duchess stood with several other influential older ladies who had been watching the scene with approval. The applause spread, growing in volume, until the entire ballroom was acknowledging both Alexander's declaration and his defense of Sophia. Lady Victoria fled, her face burning with humiliation, and around them the crowd pressed closer with congratulations and well wishes that were now genuinely warm rather than calculatingly polite. Sophia felt tears threaten but refused to let them fall, instead holding tightly to Alexander's arm and accepting the good wishes with as much grace as she could muster. Later, after they had danced twice more and received the acknowledgement of every important person present, Alexander guided Sophia onto a small balcony for a moment of relative privacy. The Dowager Duchess stationed herself just inside the doors, where she could observe them without intruding. "Thank you," Sophia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for defending me so thoroughly and so publicly." "I will always defend you," Alexander said quietly. "Because you matter to me, Sophia. Because in the short time I have known you, you have become essential to my happiness in ways I cannot fully articulate." He reached out and gently cupped her face with one hand. "I know this has all happened very quickly. I know by all conventional standards we should take more time, should be more cautious and measured. But I find I cannot wait any longer to tell you what I feel." Sophia's heart hammered in her chest. "Tell me," she whispered. "I love you," Alexander said simply. "I love your strength and your gentleness. I love your honesty and your capacity for grace, even in the face of cruelty. I love the way you see the world and the way you help me see it differently. I love who I am when I am with you, and I love who you are helping me become again after 3 years of merely existing." He paused, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. "I know I do not deserve you. I know I am bringing you nothing but complications and the weight of a title and responsibilities you never sought. But if you could find it in your heart to accept me, I would spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the gift of your love." Tears were streaming down Sophia's face now, but they were tears of joy rather than pain. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Alexander, I love you too. I have loved you since that first night when you saw me in my tears and chose to act when no one else would. I have loved you more with each passing day as I have come to know the man behind the title, the kindness and humor and genuine goodness that you hide behind reserve. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will be your Duchess. Yes to all of it." Alexander's expression transformed with a joy so profound that it made him look years younger. He drew her against the fine wool of his coat, the gesture more protective claim than simple embrace, and pressed his forehead to hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for choosing me when you could have anyone now. Thank you for believing in us when we had every reason to be cautious. Thank you for being exactly who you are." He thought of the 3 wasted years and knew he would not suffer the further delay of tiresome social convention to claim the only joy he had found. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in the warmth of their mutual declaration, while the sounds of the ball drifted out from the ballroom behind them. Then, remembering where they were and who might be watching, Alexander stepped back slightly and drew a small velvet box from his coat pocket. "I had hoped to do this more formally, with your brother's permission sought and granted, with a proper setting arranged," he said, opening the box to reveal an exquisite ring set with a deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds. "But I find I cannot wait another moment to make this official. Sophia Harriet Thornhill, would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife, my duchess, my partner in all things?" "Yes," Sophia said through her tears, laughing with the sheer joy of it. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, and Sophia saw that it fit perfectly, as though it had been made specifically for her. "It was my grandmother's," he said softly. "She was the duchess who insisted on reform in tenant housing and established schools for estate workers' children. I always thought that if I remarried, I would give this ring to someone who embodied the same spirit of strength and compassion. It belongs to you, Sophia. It was waiting for you." Behind them, the Dowager Duchess had apparently been keeping the curious at bay, but now she allowed the doors to open fully and the news to spread. Within moments, the ballroom erupted in celebration, and Sophia and Alexander were swept back inside to receive congratulations from seemingly everyone present. The following morning, Alexander called early to speak with William, who had come to London upon hearing of the Duke's attention to his sister. William gave his blessing readily and with genuine pleasure, having been deeply troubled by the cruelty Cecilia had shown and grateful that his sister had found such an advantageous match despite it. Cecilia, notably, was not present for the meeting, having apparently decided to remain at Briarwood Hall rather than face society's judgment after her behavior had been so publicly condemned. But even as preparations began for the wedding, which would take place in 3 weeks at St. George's, Hanover Square, trouble arrived in an unexpected form. 4 days after the engagement was announced, a gentleman named Richard Bancroft called at the Dowager Duchess's townhouse asking to speak with Miss Sophia on a matter of urgent importance. Richard Bancroft had been a suitor of Sophia's 3 years prior, one of the few men who had shown any interest in her at all. He had been pleasant enough, a second son of a baron with respectable prospects, but no particular fortune or title. Their courtship had lasted perhaps 6 weeks before he had rather abruptly broken it off without explanation, leaving Sophia hurt and confused. She had not seen him since. "Mr. Bancroft, this is unexpected," Sophia said coolly when she entered the drawing room where he waited. The Dowager Duchess sat in a corner with her embroidery, chaperoning as always, but positioned to allow them to converse with some degree of privacy. "Miss Thornhill, or should I say, the future Duchess of Roxbury," Richard said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Congratulations on your extraordinary success. You have risen very high indeed. If you have come merely to offer felicitations, I thank you for your kindness," Sophia replied, remaining standing rather than sitting. "However, I suspect you have another purpose for this call." "You always were perceptive," Richard said, and now his expression hardened slightly. "Yes, I have another purpose. You see, I have been reflecting on our time together 3 years ago, and I find myself recalling certain moments that might be of interest to others. Moments that, should they become public knowledge, might cast doubt on your suitability as a duchess." Sophia felt ice slide down her spine. "I have no idea what you mean, Mr. Bancroft. Our courtship was entirely proper." "Was it?" He smiled unpleasantly. I recall an afternoon in the library at Lady Somerton's house party when we were alone together for nearly 20 minutes. I recall a walk in the gardens at dusk without proper chaperone. I recall moments that could be interpreted, shall we say, according to the interpretation of the listener. "You are threatening me," Sophia said flatly, her voice steady despite the fear building in her chest. "You are threatening to spread lies about propriety that was never breached in order to achieve what? What is it you want?" "I want compensation for my silence," Richard said bluntly. "The Duke is immensely wealthy. A sum of £5,000 would ensure my discretion about events that may or may not have occurred 3 years ago. Without such compensation, I fear I might feel compelled to share my memories with anyone who might be interested in hearing them. The Duke's dead wife had an unimpeachable reputation after all. I imagine he would not wish his second Duchess to be tainted by even the hint of scandal." Before Sophia could respond, a cold voice spoke from the doorway. "I imagine you are quite wrong about that, Mr. Bancroft." Sophia spun to find Alexander standing in the entrance to the drawing room, his face a mask of controlled fury. He must have arrived for his afternoon visit and been shown directly in by the butler, drawn by the sound of raised voices. The Dowager Duchess had risen to her feet, her expression equally cold. "Your Grace," Richard stammered, going pale. "I did not realize you were expected." "Clearly," Alexander said, moving into the room with predatory grace. "Otherwise, you would not have been foolish enough to attempt blackmail in my future wife's hearing. Now let me make several things abundantly clear, Mr. Bancroft. First, I do not care what you claim happened 3 years ago, because I know Sophia, and I know she is incapable of the impropriety you are suggesting. Your Grace, I assure you I never said anything improper occurred," Richard backtracked desperately. "I merely mentioned that circumstances could be interpreted in various ways. Second," Alexander continued, as though Richard had not spoken, "even if something inappropriate had occurred, which I do not for one moment believe, it would not change my intention to marry Sophia. Her worth to me is not dependent on her past conforming to society's rigid standards of female purity. It is dependent on who she is as a person, the strength of her character, and the depth of her goodness, all of which I have witnessed personally." "Your Grace, please," Richard said, his face now ashen. "I meant no real harm. I simply thought, given the circumstances." "Third," Alexander said, and now his voice dropped to a tone so dangerous that Sophia actually shivered, "if you ever approach my fiancé again with demands or threats of any kind, I will personally ensure that you are ruined so thoroughly that you will never show your face in polite society again. I will call in every favor, use every connection, and exercise every bit of influence I possess to make certain you regret the day you were born. Am I making myself clear?" "Yes, Your Grace," Richard whispered, backing toward the door. "Perfectly clear. I apologize for any misunderstanding. I shall take my leave now." "You shall indeed," Alexander said coldly. "And Mr. Bancroft, I suggest you leave London entirely for a time. Perhaps a long visit to the continent would be beneficial to your health." Richard fled, practically running from the room, and moments later they heard the front door slam behind him, a sound that spoke eloquently of his defeat and shame. Alexander stood still for a moment, breathing deeply as he fought to control the anger still evident in his posture. Then he turned to Sophia, and his expression immediately softened. "Did he hurt you?" he asked, moving to take her hands. "Are you all right?" "I am shaken but unharmed," Sophia said honestly. "Thank you for arriving when you did. I do not know what I would have done if he had continued his threats." "You would have handled it with the grace and strength you bring to every difficult situation," Alexander said firmly. "But I am glad I was here to spare you the necessity." He paused, studying her face carefully. "Sophia, I meant what I said. Whatever did or did not happen 3 years ago is irrelevant to me. Your past is your past, and it does not change how I feel about you or my determination to marry you. Nothing happened, Sophia said quietly. We were briefly alone on 2 occasions, but nothing inappropriate occurred. Richard kissed my hand once without permission, and I was so startled and uncomfortable that I immediately removed myself from his presence. The next week he ended our courtship without explanation, and I later heard he had become engaged to an heiress. I suspect he is now desperate for funds and thought he could exploit my good fortune. Then he is both a liar and a fool, Alexander said, pulling her close in a manner that would have scandalized society, but which felt perfectly natural between them. And he will never trouble you again, I promise you that. The Dowager Duchess, who had remained quietly observant throughout the encounter, now spoke up. Alexander, my dear boy, I think perhaps it would be wise to move the wedding date forward. 3 weeks suddenly seems like too long, given that there are apparently those who would attempt to damage Sophia's reputation for their own gain. I agree, Alexander said immediately. Sophia, would you object to marrying me sooner? I can make arrangements for next week if you would accept such haste. I have no objection, Sophia said, still somewhat shaken by the encounter with Richard. I do not need elaborate preparations or a grand ceremony. I simply need you. Then we shall marry next week, Alexander declared. And afterward, we shall go directly to Roxbury House in Chatsworth. I think a period of privacy away from London society would be beneficial for both of us. Aunt Margaret, can you manage the arrangements? With pleasure, the Dowager Duchess said, already mentally organizing the necessary preparations. Leave it to me, my dears. You shall be married within the week, and properly, with all the ceremony due your positions. That evening, Alexander invited Sophia to dine with him and his aunt at the Dowager's townhouse, a small, intimate gathering that felt more like family than formal social engagement. After the meal, he asked Sophia to walk with him in the garden once more, and she accepted gladly, grateful for the cool evening air and the chance to speak privately about the day's unsettling events. I have something to show you, Alexander said as they walked along the familiar paths, now lit by lanterns hanging from the trees. Something I should have shown you before now, but I was waiting for the right moment. I think perhaps after today's encounter, the time has come. He steered her toward a small cottage at the far end of the garden, a charming stone building with a slate roof and climbing roses around the door. Lamplight glowed from within, and when Alexander opened the door, Sophia caught her breath at what she saw. The cottage had been converted into an artist's studio. Large windows along one wall would let in perfect northern light during the day, ideal for capturing the true color and form of things. Easels stood ready with fresh canvases. Paints, brushes, and all manner of art supplies were arranged on shelves and work tables. A comfortable chair sat near a small fireplace where a fire had been lit, creating a warm, welcoming atmosphere. This was Isabel's space, Alexander said quietly as Sophia moved through the room in wonder. She loved to paint, and I had this cottage renovated for her use. After she died, I could not bear to come here. It remained locked and empty for 3 years. He paused, watching Sophia's reaction carefully. But when I learned you painted, I began to imagine this space filled with life again. I began to imagine you here, creating beauty, finding peace and joy in your art. And I realized that Isabel would have wanted this place to be used by someone who would appreciate it, someone who would love it as she did. Sophia turned to him, tears streaming down her face. This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me, she whispered. But are you certain? I do not want to intrude on your memories of her. You are not intruding, Alexander said, moving to stand before her. Sophia, I loved Isabel. I will always love her. But loving you does not diminish that love, nor does creating new memories with you erase the old ones. You and she would have been friends, I think. She would have appreciated your gentle strength, your artistic eye, your capacity for kindness. And I believe she would be happy to know that the man she loved has found a way to love again, to live again, to be happy again. He drew Sophia close, holding her as she cried against his shoulder, releasing the tension and fear of the day's encounter, along with the overwhelming emotion of his gift. They stood like that for a long while, the fire crackling softly beside them, the scent of old paint and turpentine mixing with the perfume of the garden roses outside. "There is something I want you to understand," Alexander said eventually, his voice low and intense. "Today, when that man attempted to threaten you, to use your past against you, I felt a fury I have rarely experienced. The thought of anyone trying to hurt you, to tarnish your reputation or cause you pain, was unbearable. I would destroy anyone who attempted such a thing, Sophia. I would use every resource at my disposal to protect you from harm. Do you understand what I am saying?" "I think so," Sophia whispered, looking up at him. "I am saying that you are mine now," Alexander said, cupping her face with both hands. "Mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to defend against anything and anyone who would cause you harm. And I take that responsibility very seriously indeed. As I am yours to love, yours to support, yours to stand beside through whatever challenges we may face," Sophia replied, her voice steady despite her tears. "We are equals in this, Alexander. You protect me, and I protect you. You heal me with your regard, and I hope I heal you with mine." "You do," he said fervently. "You heal me every day, simply by existing, by choosing me, by showing me that life can hold joy again." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to draw back if she wished, and kissed her with a depth of emotion that made her knees weak. Unlike their first kiss in the conservatory, this was not tentative or questioning. This was a claiming, a promise, a declaration of intent that spoke of passion barely held in check. When they finally drew apart, both were breathing hard, and Alexander's gaze deepened with the strength of his desire. "We should return to the house," he said, his voice roughened, "before I forget myself entirely and compromise you thoroughly in this cottage." "I would not object," Sophia said daringly, surprised by her own boldness. "I would," Alexander said firmly, though his expression suggested the restraint cost him. "When we come together, Sophia, it will be as husband and wife, with all the rights and privileges that entails. I will not risk your reputation or your regard by acting on desire before we have made our vows before God and society. You deserve better than a hurried encounter in a cottage, no matter how romantic the setting." "You are right, of course," Sophia said, though part of her mourned the lost opportunity. "I apologize for being so forward." "Never apologize for wanting me," Alexander said, pulling her close once more. "It is one of the most gratifying things I have ever experienced, knowing that you desire me as I desire you. But we can wait a few more days. We have the rest of our lives to explore this passion between us." They returned to the main house hand in hand, and the Dowager Duchess took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly, but said nothing. She simply poured them both a glass of wine and suggested they sit by the fire for a while before Sophia retired for the evening. The next but 5 days passed in a dizzying current of preparation. The Dowager Duchess handled all the arrangements with practiced efficiency, from securing St. George's Hanover Square for the ceremony to arranging a modest wedding breakfast at her townhouse afterward. Sophia's mother and brother arrived from Hertfordshire, Lady Margaret alternating between tears of joy and anxiety about whether everything was proper and appropriate for a ducal wedding. Alexander called every day, sometimes twice, bringing small gifts, offering support with the preparations, and simply spending time with Sophia in whatever moments they could steal from the chaos. He seemed unable to stay away, as though the near disaster with Richard Bancroft had intensified his need to remain close and protective. On the evening before the wedding, he arrived at the Dowager's house with a special gift, a small velvet box that he presented to Sophia in the drawing room with both their families present. "This belonged to Isabel," he said quietly as Sophia opened the box to reveal a beautiful camellia brooch, the flowers rendered in white enamel and diamonds against a background of deep blue. She received it from her mother on her wedding day, and I have kept it safe since she died. I want you to wear it tomorrow, Sophia, as a symbol of the continuity between past and present, between the love that was and the love that is. Sophia felt tears well in her eyes as she lifted the brooch from its velvet nest. "Are you certain?" she whispered. "This is precious to you." "Which is precisely why I want you to have it," Alexander said. "You are precious to me, and I want you to know that Isabel's memory is not threatened by my love for you. If anything, I believe she would be happy to know that I have found someone worthy of wearing her treasures, someone who will honor them while creating her own legacy." Lady Margaret was weeping openly, and even the Dowager Duchess had to dab at her eyes with a handkerchief. William smiled with genuine happiness for his sister, while Sophia's younger sister Diana, who had arrived that afternoon, clasped her hands together with romantic delight. That night, lying in bed for the last time as an unmarried woman, Sophia reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 weeks ago she had been invisible, mocked, considered a failure by society's cruel standards. Tomorrow she would become the Duchess of Roxbury, wife to one of the most powerful men in England, and more importantly, partner to a man who saw her truly and loved her completely. She thought about the cottage studio waiting for her at Roxbury House, about the painting supplies Alexander had so thoughtfully provided, about the life they would build together that honored both his past and their shared future. She thought about children they might have, about the duties she would assume as Duchess, about the good they could do together for tenants and workers on Alexander's estates. But mostly she thought about Alexander himself, about the way he looked at her as though she was the most precious thing in his world, about the gentleness and passion he showed in equal measure, about the healing they had brought to each other through the simple act of being honest and vulnerable and willing to risk their hearts again. Tomorrow she would marry him, and her life would change forever. But unlike most changes in her life, this one filled her with joy rather than apprehension. Tomorrow she would become exactly who she was meant to be. The wedding ceremony at the St. George's, Hanover Square, was everything Sophia had never dared dream of. The church was filled with flowers, late autumn roses and white camellias that perfumed the air with subtle sweetness. The guest list was deliberately small, composed of close family and a select few friends, creating an atmosphere of intimacy rather than spectacle. Sophia wore a gown of ivory silk trimmed with delicate lace, her hair dressed simply with a few white roses woven through the curls. At her throat she wore Isabel's brooch, the diamonds catching the light from the tall windows, and on her hand, Alexander's grandmother's sapphire ring glinted with blue fire. When she walked down the aisle on William's arm, she saw only Alexander standing at the altar, resplendent in black, superfine with a silver waistcoat, his eyes fixed on her with an expression of such love that it took her breath away. The ceremony itself seemed to pass in a dream. She heard herself making her vows, felt Alexander slip a plain gold band onto her finger, and registered the scent of beeswax and lilies as he kissed her. During the vows, Alexander had leaned close and whispered, "You led me out of the darkness, my Sophia. Never forget your light." And she had whispered back, "You saw me, Alexander. That is the greater gift." The wedding breakfast at the Dowager's house was a joyful affair, filled with toasts and laughter and genuine happiness. William made a speech in which he publicly apologized to Sophia for not protecting her better from Cecilia's cruelty, praising her strength and expressing his joy that she had found such a worthy husband. Alexander responded by thanking William for raising such a remarkable woman, and by promising to spend the rest of his life ensuring that Sophia never again felt invisible or undervalued. "She is the Duchess of Roxbury now," he said, his hand firmly clasped with Sophia's. "But more importantly, she is my wife, my partner, my most trusted companion, and anyone who treats her with anything less than complete respect will answer to me personally." Late in the afternoon, Alexander and Sophia departed for Roxbury House in Chatsworth, accompanied only by their personal servants and a single carriage of luggage. The journey would take several hours, but neither minded. They sat close together in the carriage, fingers intertwined, speaking little, but communicating everything through the warmth of their touch and the shared silence. "Are you happy?" Alexander asked as they left London behind and moved into the countryside. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Sophia replied honestly. "This morning I became your wife, but I feel as though I have been yours for much longer than 3 weeks." "Is that strange?" "Not at all," he said, raising her hand to kiss her palm in a gesture that made her shiver. "I feel the same. Sometimes I think we were meant to find each other, that everything else in our lives was merely preparation for this moment." Roxbury House appeared in the distance as sunset painted the sky with gold and crimson. The estate was magnificent, a Palladian masterpiece set in extensive grounds with formal gardens, ancient forests, and landscaped parkland stretching to the horizon. The house itself rose 3 stories of honey-colored stone, its windows catching the last light of day and reflecting it back like mirrors. "Welcome home, Your Grace," Alexander said softly as the carriage drew to a stop before the main entrance. The staff had assembled to greet their new Duchess, and Sophia was introduced to what seemed like dozens of people, from the butler and housekeeper down to the youngest scullery maid. All curtsied or bowed respectfully, and Sophia saw genuine warmth in many of their expressions, as though they were pleased to see their duke happy again after 3 years of grief. Alexander gave her a brief tour of the main rooms before leading her to the family wing on the 2nd floor. They passed a portrait gallery where paintings of previous dukes and duchesses gazed down from gilded frames, and Sophia paused before a particularly beautiful portrait of a young woman with dark hair and gentle eyes. "Isabel," Alexander said softly, coming to stand beside her. "Painted 2 years before she died. She was 4 and 20, the same age you are now." "She was beautiful," Sophia said honestly, studying the painted face. "And she looks kind. I wish I could have known her." "She would have liked you," Alexander said with certainty. "She had little patience for artifice or pretense, and she valued genuine goodness above all else. You two would have been friends." He paused, then continued. "There is something I want to show you, something I arranged to be completed this week." He led her further down the gallery to where a new portrait hung, this one of Sophia herself. She caught her breath in surprise, recognizing a painting done from a sketch Alexander had made one afternoon in the dowager's garden. In the portrait, she sat among roses, a gentle smile on her face, one hand holding a partly open book. She wore a simple blue dress, and the artist had captured something in her expression that Sophia had never seen in herself before: contentment, peace, a sense of belonging. "When did you arrange this?" she whispered, moved beyond words. "The day after I proposed," Alexander said. "I wanted you to have your place here, in this gallery among my family. Not hidden away, not forgotten, but celebrated and honored as you deserve. Your portrait now hangs beside Isabel's. 2 remarkable women who both hold pieces of my heart." Sophia turned to him, tears streaming down her face, and kissed him with all the love and gratitude she felt. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for honoring both of us, for making space in your life and your home for a future that does not erase the past." Alexander deepened the kiss, his hands sliding into her hair and dislodging some of the white roses until they were both breathless and trembling. "Come," he said finally, his voice rough with desire. "Let me show you our chambers." The Duchess's suite was connected to the Duke's through a shared sitting room, the rooms decorated in soft blues and creams that created an atmosphere of restful elegance. Fresh flowers filled every surface, and a fire burned in the fireplace despite the mild evening. Alexander dismissed the maid who had been preparing Sophia's things and closed the door behind her, leaving them finally completely alone. "Are you nervous?" he asked gently, coming to stand before Sophia. "A little," she admitted, "but not afraid. Never afraid with you." "I will be gentle," he promised, beginning to remove the pins from her hair with careful fingers. and if at any point you wish me to stop, you need only say so." But stopping was the last thing on Sophia's mind as Alexander slowly, reverently undressed her, his hands and lips finding all the places that made her gasp and tremble. When they finally came together in the large four-poster bed, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to both their eyes, a physical expression of the emotional connection they had forged over the past 3 weeks. Later, much later, they lay tangled together in the lamplight, Sophia's head on Alexander's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, stars had appeared in the darkening sky, and the first cool breeze of autumn whispered through the half-open window. "I love you," Alexander said softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Sophia's bare shoulder. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Sophia replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. "You gave me back myself, Alexander. You taught me to see my own worth, to believe I deserve happiness and love. That is a gift beyond price." They talked for hours, about hopes and dreams, about the life they would build together, about children and duties and the quiet moments of domesticity they both craved after the drama of recent weeks. Eventually they made love again, this time with less tenderness and more passion, exploring the depths of desire they had held in check during their courtship. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Sophia woke to find Alexander watching her with an expression of such profound contentment that it made her smile. "Good morning, husband," she said softly. "Good morning, wife," he replied, pulling her close. "How does it feel to wake as the Duchess of Roxbury?" "It feels," Sophia said thoughtfully, "like coming home." The days that followed established a rhythm of domestic contentment that both Sophia and Alexander had desperately needed. They spent their mornings riding through the estate, with Alexander introducing Sophia to tenants and showing her the improvements he had made to housing and working conditions. The tenants received their new Duchess with warmth, particularly when they saw how she listened carefully to their concerns and made notes about issues that needed attention. In the afternoons, Sophia painted in the cottage studio while Alexander worked in his library, but they would meet for tea and walks in the garden, talking about everything and nothing. Alexander was teaching Sophia about estate management, involving her in decisions and valuing her opinions, while Sophia was gently drawing Alexander out of some of the isolation he had maintained even after their marriage, encouraging him to invite guests and reconnect with old friends. 2 weeks after the wedding, they stood together in the cottage studio on a rainy afternoon, watching water stream down the windows while a fire crackled in the hearth. Sophia had just completed a small landscape of the view from the cottage, and Alexander studied it with genuine appreciation. "You have real talent," he said, pulling her close. "Have you ever considered exhibiting your work?" "I am the Duchess of Roxbury," Sophia said with a laugh. "Duchesses do not exhibit paintings like common artists." "This Duchess could," Alexander said firmly. "We do not have to follow every convention, Sophia. We can make our own rules, live our own lives, within the bounds of propriety and duty, of course, but with freedom to pursue what brings us joy." He kissed the top of her head. "I want you to be happy, not constrained by what society expects of a duchess. If painting brings you joy, then paint. If you wish to exhibit, then we shall arrange it. Your happiness is my primary concern." "As yours is mine," Sophia replied, turning in his arms to face him. "And I am happy, Alexander. Happier than I ever dreamed possible. You have given me not just a title and position, but freedom to be myself, to pursue my interests, to have value beyond simply being decorative." "You could never be simply decorative," he said with a smile. "You are far too interesting for that." They made love there in the cottage, with rain drumming on the roof and paint supplies scattered around them. And it felt like a kind of blessing, a consecration of the space where past and present merged into something new and hopeful. A week later, a letter arrived from London that made them both laugh. The Dowager Duchess wrote with barely concealed glee that Richard Bancroft had fled to the continent after creditors had descended upon him demanding payment of extensive gambling debts. Apparently his threat to Sophia had been born of genuine desperation, and Alexander's warning had sent him into hiding before his financial ruin became public knowledge. "I almost feel sorry for him," Sophia said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I do not," Alexander replied firmly. "He attempted to harm you, to use your past against you for his own gain. He deserves whatever misfortune has befallen him." "My fierce protector," Sophia said affectionately, kissing him softly. "What would I do without you?" "You would be fine," Alexander said honestly. "You are stronger than you know, Sophia. But I am grateful every day that you do not have to face the world without me, just as I am grateful I no longer face it without you." One morning, several weeks after their wedding, Sophia woke feeling slightly unwell, a queasiness that lasted until mid-morning and then disappeared. She thought little of it until it happened again the next day and the next. When she mentioned it to Alexander, his face lit up with hope and concern. "Could you be with child?" he asked carefully. "It is possible," Sophia said, feeling a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. "It has only been a few weeks, but yes, it is possible." They consulted with the estate physician, who confirmed that Sophia was indeed expecting a child, likely to be born the following summer. Alexander's joy was profound and touching to witness. He became even more protective than before, insisting Sophia rest more, walk less vigorously, avoid any activity that might pose risk. "Alexander, I am not made of glass," Sophia protested laughingly one afternoon when he refused to allow her to climb the stairs to the portrait gallery. "Women have been carrying babies since the beginning of time. I shall be fine." "You are carrying my baby," he said, his hand gently covering her still flat stomach. "Forgive me if I am overly cautious about something so precious." The news brought William and Lady Margaret to visit, along with Diana, all of them excited about the prospect of becoming uncle, grandmother, and aunt, respectively. Even a stiffly formal letter arrived from Cecilia, attempting once again to mend fences now that Sophia's position was secure and a future heir was expected. Sophia responded politely but coolly, making it clear that while she held no grudge, she also felt no particular desire to cultivate a warm relationship with a woman who had treated her so cruelly. As autumn deepened into winter, Sophia and Alexander settled more completely into married life. They opened Roxbury House to carefully selected guests, hosting small dinner parties and country weekends that slowly built a social circle around them. The Dowager Duchess visited for a month, bringing with her a keen perspective and genuine kindness that helped Sophia navigate the complexities of her new position. "You are doing remarkably well," the older woman said one evening as they sat together in the drawing room while Alexander played billiards with William. "I was not certain how you would adapt to being Duchess, but you have taken to it with grace and natural authority. Alexander is happier than I have ever seen him, even before Isabel died. You have given him back his life, my dear." "He gave me back mine first," Sophia replied, her hand resting unconsciously on her stomach where the baby grew. "Everything I am now, everything I have, I owe to the moment he chose to see me rather than looking through me as so many others did." "You give him too much credit," the Dowager Duchess said gently. "He saw what was always there, Sophia. Your worth did not depend on his recognition of it, but I will grant that his seeing helped you recognize your own value, and that is no small gift." On a clear December morning, with frost sparkling on every surface, Alexander took Sophia to the cottage studio where he had arranged a surprise. The interior had been decorated with evergreen garlands and white roses, and in the center of the room stood a portrait easel draped with cloth. "I wanted to give you something for our first Christmas together," he said, his expression both nervous and excited. "Something that captures where we are now, how far we have both come." He removed the cloth to reveal a stunning double portrait showing Alexander and Sophia seated together in the cottage, sunlight streaming through the windows behind them. Alexander's arm was around Sophia's shoulders, her head resting against him, both of them looking at something beyond the frame with expressions of contentment and hope. Between them on the small table lay Sophia's palette and brushes alongside Alexander's leather-bound journal, symbols of their individual pursuits brought together in shared space. "I commissioned this from memory of afternoons we have spent here," Alexander explained as Sophia stared at the painting with tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to capture this time, this feeling of peace and partnership and new beginnings, so that years from now, when we look at it, we will remember exactly how it felt to build a life together from the ashes of loss and disappointment." Sophia could not speak for several moments, too overcome with emotion. Finally, she managed to whisper, "It is perfect. You are perfect. This life we are building is more than I ever dreamed possible." "We are building it together," Alexander corrected gently, pulling her into his arms. "That is what makes it extraordinary. Not just that we found each other, but that we chose each other, that we continue to choose each other every day." They spent Christmas at Roxbury House with family gathered around them, and it was the happiest holiday either of them could remember in years. The house was filled with laughter and music, with the Dowager Duchess presiding over festivities with benevolent authority, while William and Diana brought youthful energy, and Lady Margaret fussed over everyone with maternal concern. On Christmas Eve, as snow began to fall outside the tall windows, Alexander and Sophia stood together in the portrait gallery, looking at the three paintings that now hung in sequence. Isabel, with her gentle smile and kind eyes, Sophia among her roses with peaceful contentment, and the new double portrait of husband and wife together in the cottage studio. "Three chapters of a life," Alexander said softly. "The love that was, the love that is, and the future we are creating together. Each precious, each honored, each part of the whole." "She would approve, I think," Sophia said, studying Isabel's painted face. "She loved you enough to want you to be happy, and I think she would be glad to know you found your way back to joy." "As I am glad that you found your way to believing in your own worth," Alexander replied, turning to face his wife. "You are no longer invisible, Sophia. You never were, but now you know it, and that makes all the difference." That night, lying in their shared bed with snow falling softly outside and firelight dancing on the walls, they talked about the year ahead, about the baby who would arrive in summer, about the duties and joys that awaited them. They had come so far in such a short time, from that first painful moment on the terrace to this place of deep contentment and partnership. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Sophia asked, her head on Alexander's shoulder. "When you asked me to pretend I was with you?" "I remember every word," Alexander said. "I remember the look on your face, the tears on your cheeks, the courage it took for you to accept my offer." "I thought I was only pretending," Sophia said softly. "I thought I would have one magical evening and then return to invisibility. I never imagined it would become real, that pretending would transform into the truest thing in my life." "It was always real," Alexander said, kissing her forehead. "From the very first moment. I just did not realize it immediately, but my heart knew, even if my mind needed time to catch up. You were never a pretense, Sophia. You were always meant to be mine, and I was always meant to be yours." As winter gave way to spring, Sophia's pregnancy became more obvious, and with it came a glow of happiness that made her more beautiful than any conventional prettiness could achieve. Alexander watched her bloom with wonder, marveling at the miracle of new life growing within her, grateful beyond measure for the gift she was giving him. The baby arrived on a warm, July evening as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson. The birth was difficult, longer than expected, and Alexander paced the corridor outside the birthing room in an agony of worry until the physician finally emerged to tell him he had a healthy daughter and that Sophia had come through the ordeal with remarkable strength. When Alexander entered the chamber, he found Sophia propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in white linen. She looked up at him with such love in her eyes that he felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Meet our daughter," she said softly, holding the baby out to him. "She has your eyes." Alexander took his daughter with shaking hands, staring down at the tiny face, the miniature features, the shock of dark hair so like his own. "She is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect. What shall we name her?" "I thought perhaps Isabel Margaret," Sophia said carefully, watching his reaction. "If you approve. To honor both the woman you loved before and the woman who brought us together." Alexander looked at his wife with eyes bright with unshed tears. "You would do that?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "You would give our daughter her name?" "She was part of your life, part of who you became," Sophia said simply. "And without your capacity to love her, you could never have learned to love me. The woman who would be your second Duchess deserves to carry that legacy of love forward. Besides," she added with a tired smile, "I think the first Isabel would be pleased to know she was remembered in this way." They called her Belle. For short, this tiny creature who represented the joining of past and present, of grief transformed into joy, of love that healed rather than harmed. The Dowager Duchess arrived 2 days later and wept when she learned the baby's name, recognizing it as both an act of generosity and a gesture of inclusion that spoke volumes about Sophia's character. As summer turned to autumn once more, completing the year since that fateful wedding, Alexander and Sophia stood together in the cottage studio on a rainy afternoon remarkably similar to one a year before. Belle slept peacefully in a cradle nearby, while outside the rain fell in silver sheets and the roses still bloomed with the last warmth of the season. "A year ago today," Alexander said softly, his arms around Sophia as they watched the rain, "we stood in this place and I told you that you had made me feel alive for the first time in 3 years. Do you remember?" "I remember everything," Sophia replied, leaning back against him. "Every word, every moment, every feeling. It all seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago at the same time." "I want you to know something," Alexander said, turning her to face him. "I was not pretending to be with you that first night. I thought I was, but I was not. My heart recognized you immediately, even if it took my mind longer to understand. You were never a pretense, Sophia. You were always the real thing, the unassailable truth, the miracle I did not know I was waiting for. As you were for me," Sophia said, reaching up to touch his face with gentle fingers. "You saved me, Alexander, not just from cruelty and invisibility, but from the belief that I was less than I am. You taught me to see my own worth, and that is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They kissed then, soft and lingering, while rain drummed on the roof and their daughter slept nearby and the future stretched before them bright with promise. The drab little sparrow had learned to fly after all, carried aloft not by magical transformation, but by the steadfast belief of a man who saw her true worth when no one else could. And in turn, she had taught him to live again, to love again, to believe that happiness could follow grief just as spring follows winter. They were both exactly where they were meant to be. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story of love found in unexpected places touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of love, resilience, and hope.